Emily, are you doing the lecture introduction or am I doing the whole?
You're doing the whole, if that sounds good. Typically, Steve, we share the first slide, the introduction to the school's programs.
Well, I think we'll get started then. Are we good?
We
Steve?
are.
Right, nice to see you tonight. I'd like to introduce everybody to the Lawrence Tech College of Architecture and Design lecture series tonight. We're blessed to have one of our own, Steve Coy. And just to remind everybody, our college is a multidisciplinary full design college: architecture, game design, graphic design, industrial design, interior design, and transportation design. And Steve is critical in several of these aspects. He spans multiple disciplines and comes with multiple skill sets. And it really is my pleasure to introduce him tonight, both as a colleague and somebody who I follow his work. I'm quite interested in the work that he's doing. He doesn't work by himself. He works with Dorota Coy, who's his partner. And they're probably best known for projects like the Hygienic Dress League, but their repertoire goes much deeper than that. And there's a lot of nice interconnection between the work that they do. I think one of the things that we have to sometimes understand when we deal with conceptual artists is that we can sometimes mistake the artist for the role that they play or the way that they're introducing themselves into society. But those are constructs, and Steve does this in a quite incredible way to both challenge and critique, to infiltrate, to hijack expectations that we have. And in that way works along societal expectations and works in the epistemological framework within a society to really start to pick at what information we use and how we structure our knowledge and how we validate some of that knowledge. And I'm really excited to see in what tonight will probably be, I think, a mini retrospective of his work. The work of Steve and Dorota Coy have been published all over: New York Times, The New Yorker, City Lab, Huffington Post, Rolling Stone magazine, The Economist, and last night, PBS NewsHour. And I think what I find incredible about the work they do is how they transcend academia. And so they have both the capacity to work within the academic center, but their validity of their work is recognized in multiple medias and into our mass media systems. And so I'm extremely looking forward for the next decade of the work that Steve does. And at this point, I'd like to welcome him.
Thank you very much. That was a really great introduction, and I'm honored to be here speaking again. And I think the last time that I did a lecture, it was in 2016 here at the university. And I spoke specifically about one project, the Hygienic Dress League, and it was probably a 4-year span. And as Philip had mentioned, what I'd like to do tonight is take you through a broader spectrum of work that we've done, and I think as we get into more recent work, I'll expand and talk a bit more. So we might kind of breeze through some other stuff. And so the title is Considering Epidemiology, Temporal Agency, and Changing Landscapes. And I don't think I'll call out any of those specific titles or topics, but I think you'll be able to relate how those things are interacting with the work itself. So, and I think it's worth noting that I couldn't decide between two titles, and I spoke with Tammy, and she helped me decide on this one. Unfortunately, I can't take credit for it. This was the title of an article that was written about an exhibition that Dorota and I recently did this year in 2020 for White Hot magazine, which is a New York arts magazine. So yeah, unfortunately, I can't take credit for it. This was my title, and unfortunately, I can take credit for that. But I actually wanted to show it because I think they both relate to what we're talking about, and you'll see, when fiction becomes reality will be contextualized as I speak a bit more about the work. So temporal agency, we are going to time travel back to 2002 in Hawaii. And so there I was a grad student, and really, working in large scale ceramics and thinking about installations. And the work that I'm going to show you explores context and surrounding, and how context can change meaning. Installation art, or even relational aesthetics. I'm going to talk a little bit more about relational aesthetics, because I think there's one pinnacle example of work that we did that's a really quintessential example of it. But anyway, this is, the idea of exploring function and form here, and then exploring different uses. This is, completely different context in lava fields in Hawaii. And then, I want to show you, this is a moment where we're going to see mythology reoccur in the work itself. And so this is, for those of you that are familiar with Greek mythology, this is the Sisyphus. And so, I was pushing this ball up the hill, and this particular piece, this is a video clip, represents the kind of inner struggle between the artist and the art itself. And I actually also want to just share some stories, because I know there's students on there, and sometimes we show these slides, and you see exhibitions, and you see images on the internet, and it seems like these things just magically happen, but there's actually a real struggle there. So I'll probably share a few anecdotes. And this piece was about 300 pounds. It wasn't super heavy to push up the hill, but there was one moment where I fell backwards and the ball rolled over me. And later when I was watching the video, I could hear my friend say, oh shit. But I realized he was actually laughing at me because I could see the camera shake. So, and this is another piece. And again, so, in ceramics, ceramicists make test tiles. And so they make these test tiles for glazes. So again, I took something that was functional to that discipline, removed it entirely from that context, and created something entirely new in an environment. And these were a series of installations. I believe there was probably about 4,000 of them that were placed all over the island. I think I only have, maybe two to show you. And this one was up on a mountaintop called Tantalus, just being around the island and seeing spaces and being inspired. And you can see how this kind of mimics the city grid well below. But even another story on this one, I was driving my car, and the engine exploded because the shop, I was changing the oil, they forgot to put the pin back in. So I remember doing this installation, the shop actually rented me a small Honda Civic. So I was cramming all 4,000 of these tiles into every crevice of the car, driving around the island. And so I wanted to give you, again, this is all of this work is context to, this idea that we had an exhibition that was a mini retrospective exhibition during my sabbatical period, which happened this spring. And so, like grad students sometimes do, we were in a bar having some beers and talking about art and life and identity. And one of us had a book about 19th century corsets, as grad students sometimes do. And we were talking about the kind of absurdity of fashion, or things that people might go to make themselves look a certain way, and the constructs around society that create those that idea of social conditioning, which is going to be a later theme that comes up. And what was interesting is, as we were flipping through that book, we found a paragraph that mentioned that there was, in the 20s, like kind of a loosely around the Dada era, and loosely affiliated with the Dada era, was this group called the Hygienic Dress League, and they were all about dress reform movement. And we thought that was just a really kind of hilarious name. And so we formed a collaborative exhibition. There was about 7 or 8 of us. And here you can see some images, and there's CoAD pieces, and it was, we have some corsets in there as well. So it was a one-time exhibition. And then Jordan and I moved to Detroit, and it turned it into a different project. We kept the name, turned it into a conceptual art project that became a corporation. And one of our more known projects, and we're kind of moving a bit beyond it because we're creating work that's a little broader in scope now. But it's important to acknowledge it was in a film called Detropia, and so yeah, there you can see it, in New York Times and New Yorker. So it kind of was recognized in all kinds of media. And the idea behind this was to mimic the corporate culture as a conceptual piece of art. It allowed us to critique this idea of social conditioning, and we were inspired by theorists like Guy Debord, who talked about, he wrote Society of the Spectacle, and he talked about how we're all kind of walking through life in this sort of zombie hypnotized state where, media and everything that we see around us is dictating how we look and what we do and how we live our lives, and, purchasing cars and purchasing nice houses because those are signs of success. And so we wanted to just kind of question that perception and that notion and all of this social conditioning. And so we did that through this corporation, kind of just challenging the way our society is structured. And we advertised, we have all kinds of iconic symbolism in it. The gas mask. We even created a Marxist style structure to it, right, with 3 tiers, representing kind of the class systems as well. So just a lot of parallels and symbolism that we used in the corporation. I think we ended up, having this work across 4 or 5 continents, 30 cities. And we considered, everyone looked at us as street artists with the identity of Hygienic Dress League, but that was actually a corporation, and our street art we viewed as billboards or advertisement, like guerrilla advertising. So, and this was a piece that Philip had mentioned was on PBS last night. They were talking about, the preservation of American barns, but what we loved about it was this idea that we could add so many layers of symbolism and information, right? So we could look at how corporations are destroying, the family farms, larger corporations, or how, there's toxicity in our food. All of that symbolism is layered and embedded into that. Here's a piece too. It's just funny how these things get lives on their own. We put this on a PNC bank, and somebody took a picture, and then later somebody took a picture of somebody taking it down. And I thought about how this probably went through some type of corporate procedure to determine, if it should be taken down or what to do about this image that appeared on their facade. So, and as we did like guerrilla marketing and just not taking ourselves too seriously, right? I mean, that really says something about your art when you think it's worthy of being printed on toilet paper. So, just exploring completely different ways to kind of push the boundaries of what people might consider art, and also, this idea of guerrilla marketing and sort of shameless promoting. Even when you're in the bathroom, you come across this thing, and this becomes, this is another piece that I believe touches on this idea of relational aesthetics. We're also inspired by surrealism, and you'll see that later on, and conceptual art, as I've been talking. But this is a moment, right, where you go into the bathroom and you unwillingly become a participant in this art project. You're pulling for the toilet paper, and here is this corporation that you have no idea what it is. And then again, just thinking about different ways to disseminate this work. And what was interesting, these are holographic projections. And I was talking with one of our art criticism friends about this particular piece. And he mentioned it was really interesting because a lot of work nowadays, many people don't even see it. It just lives beyond. They don't see it in person. It sort of takes a life of its own on through social media or blog sharing. And I'm actually just going to show a video of this and take a break from talking. But it was a really great way to come up with, we're just interested in technology and this idea of holograms, and so it created this crazy 3D images. And this, what's also great is this was a collaboration with a student. They did they created the sound component for it. You know, just like I figure this has got to be the most ephemeral piece of street art that's out there. So, and again, you know, this is, you know, more corporate symbolism and therianthropic figures, which is half animal, half human combination. That's a theme that's going to recur in our work. This one's called The Eagle Has Landed, and it was done in Portugal. This one's in Madrid. So, you know, there's potentially hundreds of these to show. Back to the relational aesthetics piece, we actually aired, you know, as a conceptual art piece, we aired a television commercial. We bought the airtime. And so the idea there again is that, you know, you're a person watching Rachel Ray. We actually aired it during Rachel Ray and Ellen DeGeneres. So you're at home watching TV and you become, you know, an unsuspecting participant in this art project or art moment. And it's really important that it's in the context. And so I've actually never showed anybody this outside of the people who actually saw it aired on television. So we will let it play all the way through. But just imagine you're watching Rachel Ray, you know, it's 11:30 and you're at your house. Whoop. We're going back. Okay. And the idea was to keep it really purposefully ambiguous, just to raise all kinds of questions about what the function of this corporation might be. And this image is great. This really represents kind of a moment, I think, a pivotal moment in our practice, a shift a little bit away from hygienic dressing, but also even just from like that traditional kind of advertising format that we were working at. And this is a piece that explores, you know, the relationship between man and nature. And again, I think this is one of the coldest nights, and these are covered in phosphorus. Yeah, I think that's what it's called. And so it's supposed to glow, but because it was -6, you know, out, it didn't quite glow as well as we wanted to. We wanted these animals to look radioactive, which was funny. And we had a writer from Hyperallergic who was with us, but she was really nice, and you know, it was like, I think I see it glowing. So when we got it into darker spaces, it actually worked. But I also have, here's another video just to show kind of like what this moment looked and felt like, of, you know, carrying these animals in the middle of the road on Michigan Avenue in Detroit. Also, I think the cameraman hit his nose and was like bleeding all over his face. Okay, so yeah, and here's, you know, we're getting more into these larger scale installations, and this was a piece that was installed in Portugal, in Lisbon, Portugal, and it's 300 birds. You know, just relating this idea of migration. And all of the symbolism of the pigeon that's been throughout our work, and the idea of, like, you know, human immigration as well. And so here, this is also, we were invited to do this in France for this project called Dedal, which was, you know, somebody who knew of our work had taken over this building and asked us to do an installation inside of it. And here, there's a piece we did in Woodward, and this one was digital interactive, took over a storefront. And so as you move, the elephant moved, and there was another mode. So this is actually interactive work. I'll show a little bit of a clip from the video here. So here you can see a version where there's digital pigeons that are on the screen, and as you walk by, you scare them, and if you swat one of them, it'll shit a diamond. And then we had this other version that just replaced, total juxtaposition. It replaced your body with an elephant. And here, this is where we get into a bit of surrealism. So this was we did an exhibition for Detroit Art Week in a friend's warehouse space. And so, this is a large stereoanthropic figure. And now we're starting to, explore human belief systems and, a little bit of mythology and deities and, referencing some of the ancient Egypt. Here we are. And then we're bringing religion in as well, these portals. So it's, it's kind of this weird juxtaposition between, present, future, and past. So maybe a bit of the temporal agency. And then here we have these mannequins covered in rhinestones. There was the sound component as well to this piece. And here we are. This was a large scale installation that we did at DTE Connors Creek. Again, you can just see how important we're always responding to the environment, right? So here we see these are again the therianthropic figures, these kind of deities, and we did them in a fluorescent red, so they were glowing. And here, this is a large diamond that we built. I think it's 35 feet, and this is an old coal mine factory again. So there's that symbolism laying there, and then again the environment, the context becomes so important. You can see the scale. That's my truck over there. You can see how large scale that diamond is. Here's another image from that. And then this is an elephant that we put inside this industrial space. It has over 400,000 rhinestones on it. It was really hard to capture in images, how this actually looked. Just didn't quite translate. And then here we have a radioactive rhino. This one did work. We did figure out how to get it to glow properly. And this was installed, all around Eastern Market in Detroit, created photographs. And so this was a piece, just again, starting to explore religion and pyramids and the shapes behind pyramids. And then we're also exploring like the idea of consumption and waste. And so we see this kind of pyramid, and we don't really know if this is kind of like a reconstructed piece in the future, thinking about how religion might have been in the past, or if it's, some strange aliens came down. And so we're starting to veer into more speculative work here. And I'm actually showing a couple of images of process here. These are digitally fabricated pieces, and then we coat them with fiberglass and resin. Didn't want to include too much process work, but I also think maybe there's students here and they are interested in that. So you can see the scale of this piece. And this is what it ended up looking at. And so this is the project that we did for the sabbatical. And it was called 5 Realms. And so really, we're just thinking about human belief systems, the human condition, and we really started thinking about the difference between how we see, how we perceive, and how we interpret, right? And this is where I think the work gets a little bit epistemological, right? And so if we think about, we're all seeing the same thing, right? That's a science, but we might perceive it differently, and even more divergent is how we might interpret something, right? And those are based upon our belief systems, right? And so then it starts to question, like, are our belief systems, do our belief systems shape our reality, right? We're seeing things different. It's really interesting to think about, even politics now, or how people are perceiving different realities, and truth is in question. And so I think it was really interesting for us to, we were able to include all of these different ideas that were floating out there and create these, speculative spaces that are in the future or in alternate realities or alternate worlds. And And in this installation, we were also able to contextualize hygienic dressing. I'll talk you through each room. This one was the deity room, so like kind of the god of the halls. And even some of this stuff is being inspired by, when I was in Hawaii, I learned a bit about Buddhism, and it has these different layers and realms. So, you know, not necessarily taking from Buddhism, but taking that infrastructure from Buddhism. So here's what this room looks like. I mean, you can see these deity paintings on this wall as well, you know, borrowing from religion. It's, you know, one part religion, one part mythology, one part alien. And then here's a piece that we call Black Forest. And I think this is a good moment to talk a bit too about, you know, seeing and perception. And we kind of create these paradoxes, I believe, in our work, where we create these aesthetically beautiful forms and shapes and work. But when you think about the thing about conceptual art is that, you know, there's meaning behind that. So when you think about the concepts behind this, the idea of the Rhino dying or melting or becoming like a resource, right? There's kind of a moment of alchemy there with this melted gold. And so there's a tension between the aesthetic beauty, you know, what you're seeing, how you're perceiving this, and what the concept is, right? There's almost a conflict there. And so that's kind of reoccurring. And this was a realm that introduced the exhibition. And what was interesting is we looked at on the internet just, you know, global risk to society, including pandemic and all these other things. And I think that's where, you know, fiction becomes reality, right? Is we have all of these notes that are drawn up, and are they notes from an alien society? Are they notes from a future society looking down on us? And you know, when we look at our world from an alien perspective, it allows us to kind of project out and really assess from a strange point of view. And I think that's the idea behind some of these speculative installations. We have one that takes you into the future. This one here takes you, you know, at least 10,000 years into the future. We were talking with a paleontologist about, you know, this idea that we're the age of plastic, and would it fossilize? And he confirmed that it would fossilize. And so we thought it'd be really interesting to make this, you know, 2020 USA museum of artifacts that are, you know, they're solo cups and straws and plastic cups, and we made them into fossils out of ceramics. And then yeah, here they are. You can see the caps, and there's a little Lego man and a plastic fork. And so really like projecting the viewer into this future space to be able to actually look at our society from a different perspective, right? Just allowing people to shift that perspective. And here, again, this piece, what's really interesting is, you know, temporal agency, right? Taking something from the past, taking something from the future. Is this an art piece that was, you know, collected from the year 2025 that's now in this museum? Or is this a misinterpretation from that advanced civilization saying like, you know, those people were so diseased that they had, you know, there was no way that they didn't wear these masks everywhere. So they would just interpret that our sculptures would all, you know, inherently have these masks. What was so interesting too about this exhibition is that we were supposed to open up on March 13th. On March 11th, we decided that we were going to not have our exhibition open to the public. And on March 15th, there was a mandated government lockdown. So, you know, all of these issues that we've been exploring with risk to humanity and you know, greed and consumption, and just thinking about the fate of humanity, it was really strange to have, you know, one piece of that, you know, come to reality while we were trying to, you know, make commentary about it. So, and here this was another realm. And so thinking about maybe not so distant of the future as was the museum, but, you know, a boutique store, and what happens when resources run low. Well, this future or scenario presumes that, you know, a wealthy corporation would control those resources and be able to only sell them to the rich. And so what might that marketing look like, right? And there's a piece on there that's called One More Sunny Day, and it's you know, kind of this weird play between like a fabricated reality or something that's real. Is it a window? Is it a digital image, right? And here again, you know, selling cans of air, water, and food. And of course, this is all, it has serious undertones, but it's done with humor. It's done with that aesthetic beauty. There's a little bit of sarcasm in there. And here we have these, bejeweled masks, which was just so strangely prescient that we were making these before the pandemic and hearing about the pandemic as these things were unfolding. Is this a video? No. Okay. And then I guess we also, we had our sabbatical during the pandemic, during the shutdown. We had more plans to do work, and I actually just wanted to include them because I'm hoping that we'll still be able to do them, and we're in contact with the people. But we were, after that exhibition, we were supposed to go to Puerto Rico and do this piece, which was create these large cutout mirrored diamonds on this beautiful property. And again, I think that, touching on a bit of surrealism and this idea of like diamonds falling from the sky and just, wondering about the value of diamonds compared to the value of water, right? There's something called the diamond water paradox. And so I think we're bringing that up a little bit. And then here's the next rendition. We actually, are in conversation and maybe able to do something with them. And so here's a mirrored pyramid that would be placed in the water, sort of a futuristic kind of relic. You don't know if it's something from an alien species or something from the future. And then we were also invited after that to go to Germany and do this large piece. Obviously all of this stuff got canceled because we can't travel. But again, here, this kind of, combination of mythology. And here we have this very large figure reaching into the building. And here's the inside of it, a wheat field. And then we were going to do an overlay of virtual reality. So, yeah, that's the gist of it. I think if we want to open it up for questions.
Thanks, Steve. So we have we can handle questions on YouTube as well as here. I see there's quite a few people in the room, so I'll open it up.
Do you want me to leave the screen on or go to go to the gallery?
Probably go to the gallery if we're going to have a conversation.
Yeah, I think it's a little bit.
Not like really anything is intimate anymore, but.
Right.
Well, Steve, I just want to say the work is fantastic. Your talk was fantastic, and I'm actually like super excited to see this stuff in context and not just on the slides. But no, just a fantastic job, and I am sincerely inspired by your work.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Also, Dorota's sitting next to me. So.
Oh, Dorota, I'm sorry.
If you have a question for her, you can.
Both of you.
Over here.
No, what you guys are doing is just awesome and relevant and totally, like, hitting all the buttons.
So Tammy brought up a question about the symbolism of the bird, but it leads me into maybe a larger, or maybe a question about time and temporality, because most of the stuff you deal with is at a cultural level and it's at a social construct level. And you're also working a conceptual stage that really exists within a moment, within an hour, within a week, within a political context. How do you think about your work in that way, especially in terms of, say, archiving? And what does it mean to have, like Ralph just said, what is, of course, without the larger context, how do we actually fully experience these pieces? But it comes to mind, like when we produce catalogs and when we produce dissemination outlets and photographs of this, and you mentioned several times, it's like, well, I couldn't capture this piece. Almost, is that a strategy of the medium of dissemination to actually transfer the sculptural work into two-dimensional representation? Is there an issue when you think about the temporality of the symbol and how the symbol may not actually hold its value? I remember a conversation you and I had last year, the year before, about Hygienic Dress League was going to take ownership over the color gold, right? And like you're literally going to file the paperwork to register gold,
yeah.
Where nobody could use gold until they asked you for permission.
Right.
I mean, but
And we have an pending IPO, right? It's
you have a pending IPO. I mean, there's a whole, but I guess there's a whole bunch of. That's probably we're off. That's the second. We'll leave that one alone.
right.
But I really am interested about this idea of temporality and how you expect longevity in the work, or whether you even care when it comes to how some of these pieces are so contextual.
I think it's important to, I think it's the contextualization of it becomes extremely important, right? When it's not being experienced the way that it was meant to, right? So I think it has to be like I haven't even talked about how to display or present the commercial piece, for instance, right? I mentioned that it was the first time that I showed anybody because it was meant to happen, in that moment with the people who are viewing it as not just spectators, but also unwilling performers in this conceptual art piece, right? So I don't know if that comes with a catalog or a book where there's a way to like really describe those moments. But I think, the moment is the moment. You're bringing up that same discussion, which I thought was really interesting, that I briefly mentioned that I had with the art critic, right? The friend who was talking about the steam projections, right? And he was like, it's super weird because probably only a few truck drivers, like you were at night in March in Detroit, probably only a few truck drivers actually saw that piece, right? And now it's like has this life beyond that that's well out of context. And
well, I guess I could add the Andy Goldsworthy. All of his work is well, not all, but so much of his work is just temporal. It's just him. But the photography of the work is what that's the point of dissemination. But I think we got to make more about the commercials you guys can do. And I need to get you a 30-second spot on the Super Bowl.
Oh, let's do it. That would be so great. Yeah, and I'll answer Tammy's question about the bird. I actually didn't mention what the bird symbolizes. And again, it's really funny how spot on Philip is with a lot of the comments, right? So the bird was at a time when it was really hilariously popular to put birds on everything. I think there was even like a funny skit that came out that was like, put a bird on it. And we were of course, Portlandia skit. Yeah, Dorota has a better memory for that. And we were actually ahead of that curve. We were like, it's so funny. Everybody's putting birds on everything. So this was like the clear choice to make a pigeon our logo. And also, again, it's all about layers. It's not just one thing, right? The pigeon is actually a quite intelligent animal. It's migrated across the world. It's like this universal thing, but it's also, the perception of it is that it's a rat with wings, that it's a super dirty animal, and it's actually really highly intelligent. So we kind of love the idea of grasping onto this symbol and the like cultural responses to how people perceive a pigeon, right? So it's always multi-layered. And so then and for us too, it's hard. I think we operate in so many levels, right? There's entry points to the work at I think any level. So you look and you see this flocked installation, and you're like, oh yeah, it's this aesthetic piece has birds flying over our head, and it's about this frozen moment, and look at the the formal aesthetic aspects that are of the arrangement, right? But if you know all of the history of our work, you can't separate that also from the meaning, right? So that narrative gets to continue as a thread throughout the work. And we talk about that, and we've talked about, I didn't in this one, but we talk about like a trail of breadcrumbs, right? We're creating this like whole sort of Stephen Dorota universe, this like language and visual lexicon of symbolisms that like we ride upon and build upon. But again, allowing entry points, right? You can engage with it as minimal as you want, but if you want to engage with it more, we allow that depth in it. It's not shallow. We don't want it to be, I've heard other artists be criticized as their work is the equivalent of like a tweet. You read 3 words and you look at it and you're like, yeah, I'm done with that. I know what it is, right? our work has, it's multidimensional, it's narrative, challenges perception, challenges seeing.
So maybe Steve, I'll follow up on that. I think that's what you said is true, and it's clear. I was also thinking about the fact that it's a partnership for the two of you, and I think in terms of as you rotate a little bit, but also like more and more, there's a lot of discussion about like team teaching in the college. There's a lot of group projects that are happening in the college, and maybe just curious about maybe how you guys work. I think that multidimensionality comes also because there's multiple voices involved in the collaboration, and maybe as a super assumption as a way to kick it off is like, where does Dorota draw the line and not let you do something, right? That's an assumption, but like, how does that when you guys push one another, like where do you start to say, oh, that's too far, or what if we did this, or how does that partnership play out with you guys as you conceive of something and then also bring it to fruition? Because I think there's you showed some of the sketches of what you do, but then also like the craft of what you had in the gallery was just incredible, right? The materials that you're working with, the way that you build it. And so there's all those dimensions, but I guess I was curious about how, when it's two of you, what that conversation is like behind the scenes.
Yeah, and a quick comment on the craft of what you were talking about, right? And it was purposefully impeccable, and I think we're in postmodernism or post-postmodernism. People are going to probably continue to argue about that for a while. Some form of globalism, whatever. But what I thought of was that as I was observing kind of how we've transitioned from all of these beautiful movements in the early part of the 19th century into modernism, abex, and conceptual art, I was like, we're kind of screwed. Like, we're on the hook now for having like aesthetically beautiful, insanely crafted work, and it has to be conceptually profound, right? I mean, that's kind of where those things have progressed. And so that's where we feel we need to be, right? Like you have to build a warrior out of toothpicks, but the toothpicks have to come from like the Japanese field, and each toothpick was licked by a cat, and right? But also the statue is like impeccable, right? But I'll go back to the more important part of your question. It's really conversation.
The cat lineup that you had, though. You need more than one cat, Steve.
Yeah, you need more cats. You gotta have the cat ante.
We'd have to have a cat factory, okay?
Yeah, Margaret and I will help you with that.
What would you say? I would say that it's like always an ongoing conversation, bouncing ideas, and then yeah, we have to have. I actually love having that checks and balances in place so that I don't go off the scale somewhere and say like, this isn't who we are.
Right.
I think living as artists together and practicing together, like the conversation is all day long, every day, about some form of art project, or it revolves around art all the time. That's all we talk about. So I think we bounce ideas off of each other constantly, all day long, every day. And I think that kind of helps us define. But yeah, of course, like it's hard working in the partnership as artists. Artists are strong-willed people, with ideas to create and wanting to create your own ideas. So then you have to share them with another person. And yeah, that gets difficult, but I think like we've managed for 10 years. I don't know how we got here, but after one show, it just kind of like, we're like, oh, we can work together. And you just work through it till you get to a place that you both feel this is the right thing.
It is interesting though, go ahead.
But a lot of people, a lot of people ask us that question because not like I said, architects, artists, designers, that's like solitary, like I'm going to work on my craft kind of,
artists work in solitude. Yeah. I think more often designers are much more collaborative. But it is interesting because of, I think most artists will pick that career because they have complete and utter control over everything that they do, and everyone else has to jump around hoops and talk about it and, So it is funny that we've, sort of made it a bit more of a design and practice or something.
Or
And there's
lifestyle,
other
maybe even
collaborations.
like the way that Dorota said it is like you guys, that conversation is always ongoing. So it almost like supersedes a practice where that you leave the practice and you go home. For you guys, it's life. It's you live and breathe it every day.
We were telling, I was explaining to my parents, it was really funny. I was like, I'm never gonna retire. I'm like, you don't retire from art, right? I'm like, this is what I do. I'm like, I might change my career path or something, but we're never gonna stop making art. And even just today, right? If you think about that pyramid that's sitting in the ocean is like the most current thing on our mind. And just today I walked in the house and I was like, hey, what if we put what if there was a passage to walk into it, right? And we had weird lighting in it and there was all these little golden relics and icons just on the, all on the inside. So it's.
Well, I got a
So
question.
maybe it's in that process though. Like, sorry, Ralph, just like to pick up on it, because Steve, like having been around you enough, I think there are those, like you talk about this incredible depth within the work conceptually and the way that it's made and all these things happen. And I think so much of it seems to start with like hey, what if we did this, right? And then it kind of like, I don't know, that process kind of evolves, right? Do things often just start with like hey, could we do this? And then, yes, we can. And then, oh, it does that. And then the symbolism comes, or like, how does that play out a little bit?
Yeah, I think it's really, our work is just concept driven, and it's almost hard for when people try to describe who we are or what we do. I think people struggle a little bit because it's easy. Like people want to be able to like categorize things so that they can relate to it and understand. And they want to say, well, this person's a painter and this person's a this. And we've operated. I mean, if you look at that breadth of work, we operate on concept, right? And then we actually just figure out from there, all right, what do we need to do? How do we make this, right? How can we construct this? And yeah, there's, of course, before we even get into the making, there is that point about like, well, what does this mean culturally? What is this, what kind of symbolism is this? What is,
Yeah, I mean, the conversation is it splits to many different things between the concept, the material, Steve tends to go into the universe conversation a lot quicker than I do. Whereas I tend to go towards past. So we have.
She likes tradition and past and culture, and I like space and science and fiction and aliens.
All the work, but you're trained as a ceramicist, which is like that's where you were,
and a designer, oddly enough.
Yeah, so it's kind of like it just swirls in that circle of things between the things that we like, and sometimes I pull this way, sometimes we go that way. So.
But Wasserman did try to, pin us down, and they were like, well, we're just going to describe you as like, you're kind of like, installation sculpture artist. I'm like, sure, we'll take it. It really is conceptual art. I mean, we aired a TV commercial. We shot holograms in the city in steam vents.
Steve, I was especially impressed with the view from the alien side of things. And I thought that was a particular view that was really unusual, and I'd like to follow that further. So keep going on that.
Yeah, sometimes you've got to, right? It's hard. We all come from a perspective, and it's really hard to kind of force yourself to think about something from a different viewpoint. And I think some of those installations, the idea was to project a person into a different place, right? And now all of a sudden you're in a museum looking back at our time period, right? What are the things? It's just, and we left it ambiguous. We just put a couple prompts out there, right?
So in another direction, so I think we talked a lot about the conceptual and experiential aspects of the work, but I'm also always really fascinated in like the hard physical and intellectual work to just execute a project, like just to make it real. So like you're going to do this, you know, reflective pyramid on the beach. How the hell are you going to do that? Like, how many people does it take? Like, how do you physically make it? Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, and we actually, I thank you for bringing that up. It's honestly one of my favorite parts, and that's where, again, and I think Philip will appreciate this. I mean, this is something we preach in design principles, right? When you're doing divergence, you don't shut anything down. So we don't even care what is humanly possible when we're starting to create ideas. Like, put it here, put it there, put it this, right? And then we'll let the world kind of slap us down if that's the case. But Ralph, I really love the moment where we get to try to solve a problem that hasn't been solved before. And it brings the most interesting conversations when I walk into like a Lowe's or a Home Depot and I'm like, hey, dude, what would happen if I did this and I did this? And the guy was like, you don't do that and you don't do that. He's like, that's for a kitchen sink. And I'm like, no, but I'm like, I don't even know why I want to, I don't even know how to explain this to you, but I'm like, what if I want this to stick to a chicken or something, right? And they're just like, you wouldn't do that. I'm like, but pretend you had to.
Would this work?
I don't know. I love, you know, I was already thinking through the ocean piece, right? Like, what do I do? Okay, can I pour concrete? What materials are going to deal with the salt? You have to deal with the waves. How would you construct that, right?
Yeah, because I mean, those endeavors have their own incredible intellectual and creative demands, right?
Yeah, and we end up in collaboration with people, right? Like, we know code and computers and technology, but not to the level of like what you saw in that interactive piece. So yeah, I've got a friend in LA who was like, let me chop you some code, we'll make it work, right? And so it's knowing too when you can rely on others or need to. And so, you know, it's like our collaboration is bigger than just Dorota and I in reality, right? And there's people that we consult. We had talked about casting a car in a block of resin, right? And I think we're still going to do that. And there's one guy in the whole United States that is capable of doing this. And we've had, you know, multiple conversations about how that would get done. It's just out of the scope of, you know, my expertise. I know how to cast smaller things, but not to that skill. And it's also, it's like, you know, I would love to be there and learn how, in fact, you might do that and not get any bubbles, right?
Yeah.
Or how you would deal with the heat, right, of casting something that large in resin. So there's like we run into science, we run into all kinds of interesting and strange things, and we have to do really interesting research to figure out how to deal with some of these things, like materials that aren't there, or, you know, there's only one company that's really weirdly specializes in something. We've called, you know, manufacturers in China for requests to do, you know, certain things. So even those, you know, cast aluminum deities, people who know casting are absolutely blown away at the, you know, the ability to cast in aluminum at that scale.
Yeah.
Right. And we have a foundry. It's like, again, I don't know if I'd be capable of casting something that large. I wouldn't have the equipment, right? I have the knowledge, but.
Well, that's just a part of 21st century art making, right? It's like it has to be a collaborative endeavor if you have all these other demands, right? Aesthetically pleasing and engaging and conceptually rich and strong.
Yeah, if you're meeting the demands, I mean, of course, there's some people, it's all, you know, it's all an ideology. There's some people that might be like, well, I'm only going to be the only hand to touch this, and I'm doing these paintings and they're done that way. But even now, you know, if you look at like Kehinde Wiley, he has a bunch of incredible assistants. He's a great painter. I don't want to take anything away from him, but when he graduated, if you look at his paintings when he was at Yale, and when he started to become famous, the skill level went to a whole different level. And we know that's because there was people that he was working with to get those. And he just did like an incredible bronze cast sculpture. I forget where it was, but it was probably a $2 million cast. And it's like, you had to bring in experts when you start working at a certain level and scale.
Yeah, well, didn't Jeff Kuhn set the bar for actually never producing any of the work? He just has this massive crew that produces everything, right? And he's the provocateur, the imprimatur or something.
That's right.
Can you talk a little bit about the role of fiction? Because there's been a shift in the way that you're approaching it too. When you take a look at the HDL stuff, which is really creating moments like much more along the lines of design fiction, where we have this ambiguity of existence, the fiction becomes non-visible within the reality. And so there's this moment of second guessing whether that exists or doesn't exist. In fact, in some ways it actually does exist, but it's not real, right?
Exactly.
And also, but the latest work is approaching fiction from a much more speculative forward into the present day reflection, which breaks that technique completely. And I'm interested in just how you think about fiction in the way that the work goes, and even what you've learned from some of the stuff you did, and why you're starting to adjust your approaches to fiction and narrative in the work.
Oh man, that is a good question.
Sorry, Steve.
No, I think like, it's just.
I'm going to write a paper for you and then give it to you. Okay.
I want you to. I actually really do. Paul Johnson was going to do it as well. We were going to have a conversation. Yeah, I think hygienic dressing was in this moment. It was, riding this line between kind of real and fake, or so close to the edge, right? We've had conversations with the SEC about our IPO, and the letter that came back was absolutely hilarious. He's like, "You're on the bleeding edge." He wouldn't commit to signing I forget what it's even called. It was basically an agreement that the SEC wouldn't come and sue us. And he's like, "There's no way I can even," he's like, "You're such on the bleeding edge." He's like, "I can't tell if this is real or fake." Right. And he's like, "You're just going to have to ride the wind." But I think, and it's not even necessarily a shift. It's just a way it is a shift. It's just a way we're practicing now, not saying that it's not going to happen again, right? Like if we patent gold or something. But in some ways we end up having more control by being able to like create a little bit of fiction around these scenarios, right? So using it in like a more of a narrative sense rather than this perceptual, is this real, is this not, a sarcastic moment. Now we're able to say like, I think in some ways we're being like a bit more concrete about the fiction.
Do you think it's a response to the visibility of the criticism? I mean, your critique of some of the things that you're looking at, and it's in some ways it's a question of accessibility, like communication accessibility to what you want to communicate.
That is it. Actually, I think that might be what's dictating that, right? Is this idea of, again, when we talk about it, right, these levels of engagement, we want it to be accessible enough so that people, like you see a melting rhino, right? And you're like, okay, right, it's an animal dying. But then there's these other kind of deeper layers. And again, that like paradox that exists between the beauty and the conceptual message behind it. But yeah, I think it's about accessibility, and just I think it's just, in some ways it gives us control when we can make things up, right? it's part of the critique, I think. I'm not being very definitive, am I?
It's a conversation. It's all right. Well, we've hit 7 o'clock, which is great. Do we have any other questions or comments for Steve?
I've got one question. Steve, have you ever thought about taking this into the film world, where you might write a script and a storyline?
we had thought about film as a format, right, to create a narrative, and it might be something around like Hygienic Dress League or something else, right, as like a feature length art piece. But I don't know. It's, you know, it takes a long time to like. It feels out of reach in terms of time right now. I mean, I think at some point we would like to, you know, maybe have a book or maybe do a film like you're talking about, where the film would exist as a conceptual form of art, the way not just like a film, right, but film, the medium, as a form of art in the way that we did a television commercial, right, appropriating that corporate culture.
You think the 14-story pyramid is easier to do than the film?
But yeah, obviously video, blog, all that stuff, shorts. I mean, I guess I'm wondering how you're gonna monetize this, because you're sitting on a cash cow. You just have to figure out how to get it out there. I'm serious about doing a 30-second spot in the Super Bowl. Someone will be happy to put up the money. We just have to figure out who that person is.
Yeah, let's do that. And I know now I have a relationship with Lorna Baldwin from PBS NewsHour, and they said they wanted to, it's about timing like an IPO, right? That's another piece that becomes a conceptual art piece, a relational aesthetic piece, where like the buyers are now participants in this public art project, right?
Absolutely.
It'd be like the first public art project, maybe, right? Public.
Well, I was thinking also, if corporations are people, they're legally people then, right?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So can a corporation run for the presidency? Did you file the right papers on time?
That would be a good one. We also looked into selling deeds to plots in the ocean, right? So if you think about how the Earth moves,
yeah.
or like somebody is selling deeds to the moon and Mars already, unfortunately. But there is all kinds of stuff, and I think timing something right, like, you know, PBS NewsHour, if they wanted to launch our IPO, and I let them know, like, the media, you guys are actually the artists in this sense, right? Because you're the ones putting the performance out there, right? And they were all about it. So it is a matter of like, how do you time that with a Super Bowl ad and a media outlet that could reach a lot of people, and then have shares that could be bought, monetize it in that way. But I think we're extraordinarily lucky to be at some point in our career, right? Things shifted and we're starting to get larger commissions where we're able to do projects that, you know, normally you wouldn't be able to get to do unless you were an artist selling a bunch of work. We don't make anything to sell.
So I got to take off, but Dorota, Steve, thanks for bringing joy.
No problem. Thanks for being here.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Steve.
Thank you all.
Have a good night.
Yeah, you as well.
Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. And thank you from the lecture series from Lawrence Technological University, the College of Architecture and Design. And we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.